Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Patch 3.18.0D went live this morning, and this is the fourth wave of nerfs targeting Archnemesis modifiers. These are mostly targeting things that grant outright immunity to ailments to a monster. So for example, Frostweaver no longer grants immunity to cold ailments, it's instead granting 80% reduced effect of cold ailments. 80% reduced effect means that you will still be able to inflict the chill and freeze statuses on a monster, just not very effectively and not for very long, but inflicting brittle will be much less impactful than normal because it's going to be hard to get a meaningful amount of brittle on that monster. Now, all of these are being nerfed to 80% reduced effectiveness of that ailment if it is the core identity of the mod in question. So Frostweaver, Permafrost, Flameweaver, Stormweaver, Dynamo, and Froststrider, as well as a couple of others, Flamestrider, Stormstrider, and so on. These are being nerfed from immunity to 80% reduced effect of those ailments. On the flip side, some mods are being nerfed to 50% reduced effect instead. And these are the ones like Ice Prison and also Mana Siphoner, where the primary function of the mod is not something related to that ailment type. Instead, the primary function of it is to do something that's really impactful just in terms of normal gameplay, like restraining your movement with Ice Prison, or for Mana Siphoner, it's that ring of lightning damage and mana drain. Basically a mobile Baran rune. Those sorts of mods, those are only going to be 50% reduced effect of the ailment in question. The other sorts of changes that are coming up, there's going to be a nerf to Steel Infuse. Steel Infuse currently grants 30% overwhelm of physical damage reduction. This is being nerfed to 10%. For most players, this is going to be modestly impactful. If you've got a modest amount of armor but not a massive amount, you'll find that this will mean that those monsters hurt a little bit. Where this is really impactful though is on characters that scale armor to the moon. So a character that might scale armor through the use of Iron Reflexes, a Chayula Chest, Determination, Defiance Banner, Grace, especially Replica Dreamfeather builds, those builds are going to find that they have an enormously reduced amount of damage spikes that are caused by Steel Infused monsters. The reason for this is that those characters might have 90% physical damage reduction, and going from 90% to 60% is a quadrupling of damage. Going from 90% to 80%, which is going to be what's happening now, is a lot less than that. Rejuvenating is being nerfed in terms of its interaction with unique monsters. Unique monsters can get caught up in the healing nova from a rejuvenating monster, and this is being capped at 10% of the monster's life, recovered over 2 seconds. So they'll gain 5% life recovery per second, but it's only going to last for a total of 2 seconds. This is still going to mean that you're not going to want to have a rejuvenating monster near a boss, at least if that boss is tanky, but it's going to mean that when there are monsters that can spawn additional rare adds, then this is going to be much less catastrophic when you get a rejuvenating one. Effigy is being nerfed again. Effigy, however, I think the fundamental problem with this mod isn't being addressed. The problem with Effigy is that it's something that is just not that visually impactful on the screen. With Mana Siphoner, you know immediately, oh, that's that mana drain ring. I've got to get away from that. I've got to deal with it somehow. Either I run into it or I run outside of it. The same is the case with Magma Barrier, probably one of the most visually impactful of all of the Archnemesis mods. On the flip side, Effigy just connects a line between you and a doll of yourself on the ground. And that means you need to either run 2 screens away, or alternately you need to kill everything on the screen before the beam becomes active. When it is active though, the Effigy will activate within 2 seconds, and 50% of damage from hits taken by the Effigy is being taken by the player now. This previously was 100%. Effigy doesn't work the way that a lot of us thought it did during the Archnemesis League. Essentially, the Effigy is a decoy totem with your name on it. It will taunt enemies, and then that damage will be reflected to the player at 50% intensity. So it's not actually reflecting player damage, it is reflecting monster damage that's suffered by it. You still have to deal with the Effigy quickly. Ultimately, Effigy is a lesson in just how deadly the game is if you have no defenses. You'll find that you will get killed really quickly, and your Effigy has basically no defenses on it. It has, I don't even know if it's got any resistances. It certainly doesn't have any significant amount of armor or any significant amount of evasion or anything, any capacity to evade at all. And as a result, the Effigy will take an enormous amount of damage when it's got enemies focusing on it. Even with only 50% reflected to you, it's pretty deadly. So really, when you see that beam appear, you need to run 2 screens away until a beam breaks. Then you can return, and even though the Effigy will still be there, it doesn't seem to relink, or if it does relink, it'll take a little while to relink. and so you'll be safe there. Crystal Skinned is getting some visual charge up notifications. This is important because Crystal Skinned is one that was killing you without any real warning. It actually didn't often kill you, but it would do a lot of damage. It could really chunk you hard when you killed the monster in question, and it was pretty difficult to see what was going on. So hopefully that'll be more visual, but I do think that Effigy needs the visual changes more. And lastly, Trickster and Juggernaut were partially breaking other mechanics. Trickster could break things in the Azurite Mine, where sometimes you would have to kill a specific rare monster to proceed. That's no longer the case. Trickster just can't spawn on those monsters there. Juggernaut was interesting in that on normal monsters in Blighted maps, it was actually somewhat of a fair counter to one of the most powerful strategies players were using. One of the things you can do in Blighted maps is you can stop monsters from moving. However, monsters that are immune to stuns can just ignore this, and that's where the Juggernaut came in. However, Juggernaut could also spawn on naturally very fast monsters, and when this happened, it was just fundamentally unfair in Blighted maps. So you'd have a situation where a Blighted map would be going well, then you would get a Juggernaut monster that was faster than usual, and even though you're killing it reasonably effectively, it's still able to just blitz past you, can't be affected by any sorts of slowdowns you can inflict on it, and it can just get straight to the pump and trash the place. Especially if it was on something fast like a Fleet Wheel. That's no longer going to be able to spawn. That means that Blighted maps are going to be much easier again. Some of the cheese strategies that have been used in previous leagues will now exist again. So the cheese strategy involves using tier 3 Empower towers, so that's the ones that make other towers better, not the ones that make your character better. You have those to rank 3, and you also augment them further with ring enchants. And then at that point, if you have a tier 3 chill tower or a tier 3 physical tower, these will stun lock or freeze lock any enemies that walk into them. This isn't an absolute lock, in that when there's a large number of monsters in one place, some of them will be shuffled out of the area that the actual move speed reduction to 0 applies in. So you do need to still kill some of the monsters. But it will deal with enough of them that you can easily kill the rest through towers. And that's the way that players were cheesing Blight Ravage maps in the past. Expect that this will be the case again. People still won't generally be beating Blight Ravage maps easily that have monsters can't be stunned or slowed below base speed, but if they don't have that mod on them, they will be pretty easy again. And I think that a lot of people will probably try to get that challenge done right now, while it's a lot easier than it has been. A number of other little changes as well. Character level no longer prevents you from using Sentinels in act areas. This is going to make one of those challenges that requires you to go back into the axe and to kill an act boss while it's empowered by a Sentinel. It's going to make this a lot less unpleasant than it otherwise was going to be. I didn't do this while I was leveling up. I was a little bit underconfident when I was at Merveil, and that was probably the right spot to have done it in hindsight. And so therefore you didn't really want to do it on one of the harder bosses like Depraved Trinity or Katava. So I ended up not getting this done. Now that it's available, it's something that will be much easier. Go back to something like Brine King that's quite easy to progress to, where there's a waypoint near it, where there's no sort of messing around with getting other little things on the way, and of course where the boss has only a few tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of hit points, rather than the 10 million plus that Katava has. Now the next line is dealing with the changes to a Sentinel Runic node. There is a node in the Sentinel controller that causes you to, in theory, not get normal rarity Sentinels anymore. They'll be upgraded to magic instead. And what they're doing here is they're changing the description of the node so that it exactly reflects what it does, rather than changing the node's behavior itself. So this is more of a description fix, and that node is still going to be fairly mediocre, but still somewhat usable. Number of controller things that are being changed here. So those of you that have tried playing Path of Exile with a controller will be able to give some feedback, I guess, on whether these are positive changes or not. I'm not really in a position to say. I do want to try leveling a character at some point using a controller, but that's something I might do a little bit later in the league. Unfortunately, the destructible pillars in the Polaric hideout can no longer be moved by Void Sphere. This is something I should have tried last night while it was still possible. The Polaric hideout, there was a couple of things you could do where you could move around those pillars as long as you weren't actually destroying them. Unfortunately, that's no longer possible, which is probably for the best because, you know, I don't think GG really want it so that every time someone comes into your hideout to trade, they can trash the place until you log out and stay logged out for 15 minutes and then log back in and make a new hideout that way. A couple other things that are being fixed. There was a bug that was allowing Varanustra to use a number of skills it wasn't meant to be able to. There was a couple of other little challenge-related bugs that have been fixed, so, just the sort of normal minor bug fixes. But the main focus of this is going to be the nerfs to elemental ailment immunities, which I think you'll find will have a minimal impact on gameplay unless you're a character that just cares about the actual act of slaying a monster that is frozen, or slaying a monster that is shocked, or slaying a monster that is chilled, or just monsters being chilled for the purposes of hypothermia support. Those sorts of situations, it's going to be a fairly significant impact. You're going to find you're going to deal a lot more damage with hypothermia supported skills because of these changes. But otherwise, it's probably not the biggest changes in the world. May Evolves have interesting results, and I will see you around.